The November fog that evening clung to Belgravia like a gentleman's glove, muffling the sounds of London's fashionable quarter and lending an air of intimate conspiracy to the drawing-room of Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton at number 23, Chesham Place. The widow of the late Horatio Pemberton, England's most celebrated horologist, had become something of a legend herself in the months following her husband's death. Her Thursday evening salons drew an eclectic mixture of collectors, scholars, and society figures, all united by their fascination with the intricate world of timepieces that filled every corner of her elegant townhouse. On this particular evening, the soft symphony of ticking that pervaded the house seemed more pronounced than usual. Grandfather clocks stood sentinel in the hallways, their pendulums swaying in hypnotic rhythm, while delicate carriage clocks and ornate mantelpieces created a chorus of mechanical precision. The effect was both soothing and slightly unsettling, as if time itself had taken residence in the Pemberton household. Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton moved among her guests with the grace of a woman who had learned to navigate both society and sorrow with equal composure. At 52, she retained the refined beauty that had first captivated her late husband, though her dark hair now bore distinguished threads of silver, and her gray eyes held depths that spoke of recent loss. Tonight she wore a gown of midnight blue silk, and at her throat rested her most treasured possession, the celestial timepiece, a pendant watch of extraordinary beauty and complexity that had been Horatio's final gift to her. Among the evening's guests was Mr. Julian Ashworth, a prominent dealer in rare timepieces whose reputation for aggressive acquisition had earned him both wealth and wariness. His florid complexion and booming laugh dominated whatever corner of the room he occupied, and his eyes held the predatory gleam of a man who viewed every beautiful object as a potential conquest. He had been particularly persistent in his attempts to examine Mrs. Pemberton's private collection, especially the legendary Oracle of Time, Horatio's masterpiece that remained locked away in the study. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a respected horologist in her own right, provided a sharp contrast to Ashworth's bombast. Thin and precise, with steel-rimmed spectacles and an economy of movement that spoke of scientific training, she observed the gathering with the analytical eye of one accustomed to dissecting complex mechanisms. She had been Horatio's protégé and, some whispered, had harbored feelings for her mentor that transcended professional admiration. Near the fireplace stood Victor Pemberton, Eleanor's stepson from Horatio's first marriage. At 28, he possessed the languid grace of a man who had never found it necessary to earn his own living, though his inheritance had proven disappointingly modest. His relationship with his stepmother was cordial, but strained, particularly since Horatio's will had left the bulk of the estate, including the valuable timepiece collection, in Eleanor's capable hands. Miss Catherine Morse, Eleanor's companion and secretary, moved quietly through the gathering, ensuring glasses were filled and conversations flowed smoothly. Though unremarkable in appearance, she possessed the invaluable quality of near invisibility that made her privy to conversations others assumed were private. Her devotion to Eleanor was absolute, and her knowledge of the household's routines was encyclopedic. As the evening progressed, Eleanor had promised her guests a special demonstration. At precisely 11:45, she called for attention, her voice carrying easily over the gentle murmur of conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her hand unconsciously touching the pendant at her throat. "My late husband often said that time was the most honest of companions. It neither flatters nor deceives, but simply tells the truth. Tonight I thought you might appreciate a demonstration of temporal precision." She led the group to the study, a room that had been Horatio's sanctuary and remained largely unchanged since his death. The walls were lined with his most precious creations, but dominating the space was the Oracle of Time, a magnificent automaton clock that stood nearly 4 feet tall. Its brass and enamel case depicted a miniature world where tiny figures moved through their eternal dance, marking the hours with mechanical perfection. The oracle, Eleanor explained, is synchronized with every timepiece in the house. At the stroke of midnight, you will hear a symphony of precision that my husband spent years perfecting. The guests arranged themselves around the study, their faces reflecting the warm glow of the gaslight. As the final minutes before midnight ticked away, an expectant hush fell over the room. Eleanor stood beside the oracle, her hand resting lightly on its case, her expression serene yet somehow melancholy. The first stroke of midnight rang out from the oracle, clear and true. Throughout the house, the other timepieces joined in harmonious succession. Grandfather clocks, mantelpieces, and delicate carriage clocks, all proclaiming the arrival of a new day. The effect was magnificent, a cascading symphony of mechanical voices that seemed to celebrate the very essence of temporal order. But as the 12th stroke faded into silence, the impossible occurred. A 13th chime rang out, clear and unmistakable, shattering the perfect harmony like a discordant note in a flawless composition. In the stunned silence that followed, Eleanor's hand flew to her throat. Her eyes widened in shock as her fingers found only the broken chain of her pendant. The celestial timepiece, Horatio's final gift and her most precious possession, had vanished. "Good heavens!" exclaimed Dr. Whitfield, while Ashworth's face flushed an even deeper shade of red. Victor straightened from his casual pose against the doorframe, suddenly alert, and Miss Morse pressed her hand to her mouth in dismay. Eleanor's voice, when she spoke, was remarkably steady. "It would appear, ladies and gentlemen, that someone among us has taken advantage of our gathering to commit a most audacious theft. I must ask that no one leave until this matter is resolved." As the reality of the situation settled over the assembled company, the atmosphere in the study grew thick with suspicion and unspoken accusations. Each guest found themselves studying their companions with new eyes, wondering who among them was capable of such calculated deception. It was Miss Morse who, with characteristic efficiency, suggested that the matter required professional attention. "Mrs. Pemberton," she said quietly, "perhaps we should contact Scotland Yard. This is clearly beyond what we can resolve ourselves." Eleanor nodded gravely. "Indeed, and I believe I know precisely whom we should summon. There is a certain Belgian gentleman whose reputation for solving impossible mysteries precedes him. If anyone can unravel this puzzle, it is Monsieur Hercule Poirot." As the fog continued to swirl outside the windows of number 23, Chesham Place, and the stopped clocks bore silent witness to the night's strange events, the stage was set for a mystery that would test even the legendary detective's powers of deduction. For in the world of precision, timepieces, and human nature, the most complex mechanisms are often found not in brass and steel, but in the hidden workings of the human heart. The 13th chime had sounded, time itself had been violated, and somewhere in the elegant drawing rooms of Belgravia, a thief walked free among the very people they had deceived. Only Hercule Poirot's little grey cells could hope to restore order to this temporal chaos and bring justice to the affair at the clockmaker's widow. Miss Morse moved with characteristic efficiency to the telephone in the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the Persian runner that had absorbed countless conversations over the years. The assembled guests remained in the study, each acutely aware that they were no longer merely Eleanor's invited companions, but potential suspects in a most audacious theft. The fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, while within, the atmosphere had grown thick with unspoken accusations and barely contained anxiety. Julian Ashworth planted himself before the fireplace, his florid complexion deepening as he proclaimed loudly, "This is preposterous. A search, that's what we need, a thorough search of everyone present. The thing cannot simply have vanished into thin air." His eyes, however, betrayed a nervousness that his bluster could not quite conceal, darting repeatedly to the various timepieces that surrounded them like silent witnesses. Dr. Whitfield adjusted her steel-rimmed spectacles with scientific precision, her analytical mind already working through the logistics of the theft. Actually, Mr. Ashworth, the circumstances suggest something far more sophisticated than a common theft. The timing, the precision required to sever the chain during the chiming sequence, this was planned with considerable care. Victor Pemberton remained in his shadowed corner, his usual languid demeanor replaced by something sharper, more alert. "How fascinating that we should all become suspects in our own drawing room," he observed with bitter amusement. "Rather like one of those detective novels, isn't it? Though I suspect the reality will prove far less entertaining." Eleanor maintained her composure with remarkable dignity, though her hand continued to flutter unconsciously to her throat where the celestial timepiece had rested. "We shall wait for professional guidance," she said firmly. "Until then, I ask that everyone remain calm and patient." Miss Morse returned within moments, her efficient manner unchanged despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Monsieur Poirot is on his way, madam. He requested that nothing be disturbed, and that all present remain exactly where they are." The wait seemed interminable, though barely 30 minutes passed before the doorbell announced the arrival of London's most celebrated detective. Miss Morse ushered him into the study, where the assembled company turned expectantly toward the compact figure who entered with measured steps and impeccable bearing. Hercule Poirot surveyed the room with eyes that missed nothing, the broken chain glinting at Eleanor's throat, the nervous energy radiating from Ashworth, the defensive posture of Victor, the scientific curiosity in Dr. Whitfield's gaze. His appearance was, as always, immaculate despite the late hour and London's persistent fog. Patent leather shoes gleamed, his mustache was waxed to perfection, and his dark overcoat bore not a single crease. "Madame Pemberton," he said, executing a precise bow that conveyed both respect and professional authority. "Hercule Poirot, at your service. I understand that you have experienced a most singular theft, one that occurred during a gathering of your most trusted acquaintances. This is indeed a puzzle worthy of attention." Eleanor rose gracefully, her relief evident. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming so promptly. The circumstances are precisely as you describe. My husband's final gift, the celestial timepiece, was stolen from around my neck during our midnight demonstration, while we were all gathered together in this very room." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly, a gesture those familiar with his methods would recognize as indicating intense interest. "Ah, but this is most fascinating. A theft committed not in darkness and secrecy, but in the presence of witnesses during a moment of shared attention. This suggests either remarkable audacity or exceptional skill. Perhaps both." He approached Eleanor with the careful steps of a man who understood that every detail possessed potential significance. "If you would permit, madame, I should like to examine the evidence. The manner in which the chain was severed may tell us much about our thief." From his waistcoat pocket appeared a small magnifying glass, produced with the fluid grace of long practice. His examination of the broken chain was brief but thorough, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful as he studied the clean cut in the delicate links. "Most interesting," he murmured, straightening. "The chain has been severed with considerable precision, not torn or yanked in haste, but cut cleanly with proper tools. Our thief came prepared and possessed both the skill and the nerve to act in a crowded room during a moment of supposed distraction." Ashworth shifted uncomfortably. "Surely you don't suspect one of us? We're all respectable people, friends of the family." Poirot's gaze settled on him with the precision of a well-aimed arrow. "Monsieur Ashworth, respectability and friendship are excellent qualities, but they do not preclude human weakness. Logic dictates that if the timepiece was present at the demonstration's beginning and absent at its conclusion, and if no outsider entered this room, then our thief must indeed be among us." He clasped his hands behind his back, assuming the contemplative pose that marked the beginning of every investigation. "Now then, we shall proceed methodically. No one will leave this house until the truth is revealed. The little grey cells, they will sort fact from fiction, and justice will be served." Poirot arranged 2 chairs with mathematical precision before the Oracle of Time, ensuring they faced each other at precisely the correct angle for optimal psychological observation. The assembled suspects watched with varying degrees of nervousness as the famous detective prepared to conduct his methodical examination of their testimonies. His manner was courteous yet inexorable, like the steady progression of clockwork itself. "We shall proceed systematically," he announced, his accent lending gravity to each word. "Each of you will assist Poirot in understanding not merely what occurred, but why it occurred. The human heart, mes amis, is more complex than any timepiece and infinitely more revealing." He gestured toward Dr. Whitfield with a slight bow. "Docteur, if you would be so kind as to join me. Your professional expertise makes you an invaluable witness to tonight's extraordinary events." Dr. Whitfield approached with scientific composure, settling into the chair with mechanical precision that spoke of a mind accustomed to order and analysis. Behind her steel-rimmed spectacles, her eyes held the steady gaze of one who had spent years examining intricate mechanisms. "Your relationship with the late Monsieur Pemberton," Poirot began gently. "It extended beyond mere professional collaboration, did it not?" A slight flush crept up Dr. Whitfield's neck, though her voice remained steady. "Horatio was my mentor and colleague. I held him in the highest professional regard." "Ah, but professional regard. It is a cold phrase for what I observe in your manner when his name is spoken." The slight softening of the voice, the momentary pause before answering. "These are the tales of deeper feeling, non?" Dr. Whitfield's hands tightened imperceptibly in her lap. "Whatever personal feelings I may have harbored were never expressed. Horatio was devoted to his wife, and I respected that completely. Yet his death must have caused you considerable distress, not merely the loss of a mentor, but perhaps the end of hopes long cherished." "I continued his work," she replied firmly. "That seemed the most appropriate tribute to his memory." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "During tonight's demonstration, you were positioned where, precisely?" "To Mrs. Pemberton's right, approximately 3 feet away. I had an excellent view of both her and the oracle's mechanism. I was particularly focused on the synchronization sequence. It never fails to demonstrate Horatio's genius." "And the moment of the theft itself?" Dr. Whitfield frowned in concentration. "The lighting was somewhat dim, all attention focused on the chiming sequence. There was a moment, just as the 12th chime sounded, when I noticed a brief glint of metal near Mrs. Pemberton. I assumed it was merely gaslight reflecting off the oracle's brass fittings." "This glint, could you be more specific about its location?" "It seemed to originate from behind Mrs. Pemberton, possibly near the doorway where Mr. Victor was positioned." Poirot made a careful note. "Your professional tools? They would be capable of cutting delicate chain links?" "Certainly. Precision wire cutters, small shears, specialized pliers, all essential for horological work. They're in my equipment case in the hallway." "Merci, docteur. Most illuminating." As Dr. Whitfield returned to her position, Poirot turned his attention to Julian Ashworth, whose florid complexion had deepened during the previous interview. "Monsieur Ashworth, your interest in Madame Pemberton's collection is well documented. You have made several attempts to acquire pieces, have you not?" Ashworth's chest puffed with defensive pride. "I'm a legitimate dealer with an impeccable reputation. My offers have always been fair and proper." "Yet persistent," Poirot observed mildly. "The celestial timepiece in particular seemed to capture your imagination. Any serious collector would covet such a piece. It represents the pinnacle of English horology. From a business perspective, its value is extraordinary." "And your position during the demonstration?" "I was near the oracle, naturally. Perhaps 5 feet from Mrs. Pemberton, facing the mechanism. I saw nothing suspicious. My attention was entirely focused on the clockwork." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "Yet you moved closer as midnight approached, did you not? The desire to observe such precision at close quarters, it would be irresistible to a man of your expertise." Ashworth hesitated fractionally. Perhaps I stepped forward slightly. One doesn't often witness such mechanical perfection. Indeed. And your hands during this moment? Occupied with my sherry glass, naturally. Poirot turned finally to Victor Pemberton, who had maintained his languid pose against the door frame throughout the interviews. Monsieur Victor, your vantage point provided you with an excellent view of the entire proceedings, did it not? Victor smiled with practiced indolence. Quite so. I found watching the assembled company far more entertaining than observing clockwork, however magnificent. And what did you observe? The usual human comedy. Ashworth practically salivating over the mechanism, Dr. Whitfield lost in professional reverie, Miss Morse hovering attentively over my stepmother. Nothing particularly remarkable. Yet something remarkable did occur. The theft of a valuable timepiece from around your stepmother's neck while you watched. Victor's smile never wavered. If I had witnessed the actual theft, Monsieur Poirot, I would hardly have remained silent about it. Poirot rose from his chair, his expression thoughtful. The interviews had revealed much about motives and opportunities, but the mechanism of the crime remained tantalizingly elusive. The little grey cells were working, sorting through contradictions and psychological tells, seeking the pattern that would unlock this temporal puzzle. "We shall now examine the physical evidence," he announced. "The tools, the positioning, the very mechanics of deception. For someone in this room possesses not only the motive for theft, but the skill to execute it under impossible circumstances." Poirot moved with the deliberate precision of a master craftsman examining a delicate mechanism, his patent leather shoes silent on the Persian carpet as he approached the physical evidence that would either confirm or contradict the psychological impressions he had gathered. The assembled company watched with mounting tension as he opened Dr. Whitfield's leather equipment case, which rested on the hallway table where she had placed it upon arrival. "Ah," he murmured, his trained eye cataloguing the array of specialized instruments within. Wire cutters, precision shears, jeweler's pliers, all the tools necessary for delicate horological work. He produced his magnifying glass, examining one particular pair of small wire cutters with scientific thoroughness. These cutters show microscopic traces of gold alloy on the cutting edges, gold of the precise composition used in fine jewelry chains. Dr. Whitfield stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her nervousness. "Those tools are essential for my work, Monsieur Poirot. Anyone could have accessed them. They were in the hallway throughout the evening." "Precisely, Doctor, which brings us to our central paradox." Poirot straightened, his expression thoughtful. "The evidence suggests these tools were used, yet the theft occurred while we were under mutual observation." He approached the Oracle of Time, studying its intricate mechanism with professional interest. Opening a small panel with his handkerchief, he examined the internal workings without disturbing their arrangement. "Most interesting," he observed, noting fresh oil on a lever that should have remained untouched. "Someone has recently adjusted the chiming mechanism, prepared, shall we say, for tonight's 13th chime." Before anyone could respond, the doorbell's authoritative chime announced an arrival. Miss Morse moved efficiently to answer it, returning moments later with a robust gentleman whose practical demeanor contrasted sharply with Poirot's elegant precision. "Inspector Japp, Scotland Yard," the newcomer announced, removing his coat with brisk efficiency. "Monsieur Poirot requested official assistance. What have we got, then? A drawing-room theft among the respectable classes." Poirot executed a slight bow. "Mon ami, we have a most singular puzzle. A valuable timepiece stolen from around Madame Pemberton's neck during a gathering of her most trusted acquaintances. The circumstances suggest considerable planning and intimate knowledge of horological mechanisms." Japp absorbed the situation with professional economy, his experienced eye taking in the assembled suspects and the evidence of Poirot's preliminary investigation. "Right then. Standard procedure. We'll search coats and personal belongings first. Thieves often keep their prizes close at hand." He gestured to a constable who had accompanied him. "Nobody leaves until we've sorted this out." Julian Ashworth's florid complexion deepened. "I object to being treated like a common criminal. This is preposterous." "You may object all you like, sir," Japp replied amiably. "Won't alter the necessity of a proper search." The systematic examination began in the narrow cloakroom where the evening's outer garments hung in orderly fashion. The assembled company waited in tense silence, broken only by the gentle chorus of ticking that pervaded the house. Eleanor's hand continued to flutter unconsciously to her bare throat, while Victor maintained his languid pose with studied indifference. From the cloakroom came Japp's voice, muffled but unmistakably satisfied. "Well, well, what have we here?" He emerged carrying a folded square of paisley silk, opening it with ceremonial precision to reveal the celestial timepiece nestled within like contraband treasure. A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. Eleanor's involuntary cry of relief mingled with Victor's short, bitter laugh, and Dr. Whitfield's startled exclamation of disbelief. Ashworth stared at the recovered timepiece, his face draining of color. "That is not mine," he managed, his voice hoarse with shock. "Someone planted it there. I've been framed, I tell you." Japp's eyebrows rose with professional skepticism. "Found folded in your overcoat pocket, sir. You were positioned closest to Mrs. Pemberton during the demonstration, and your interest in this collection is well documented. Seems straightforward enough to me." But Poirot's attention had shifted to Miss Morse, whose eyes were fixed on the recovered timepiece with an intensity that seemed oddly disproportionate to her usual efficient composure. Sensing his scrutiny, she quickly looked away, her hands smoothing her plain dress with nervous precision. "If matters appear simple, mon ami," Poirot said gently to Japp, "it is not always because they are so. A mind capable of engineering an extra chime would hardly risk discovery by hiding evidence in the most obvious location." Ashworth seized upon this thread of hope. "Exactly. Tell him, Monsieur Poirot. This is clearly the work of someone far more cunning than a simple theft would suggest." As Japp prepared to escort Ashworth away for formal questioning, Poirot remained beside the Oracle of Time, his expression deeply contemplative. The little grey cells were working with increasing intensity, for something in the evening's revelations struck him as profoundly wrong. Not in the evidence itself, but in the theatrical precision of its discovery. "Un moment, Inspector." Poirot's quiet voice carried the unmistakable authority that had halted countless premature arrests throughout his illustrious career. "Before we conclude this affair with such satisfying simplicity, perhaps we might examine our evidence with the precision it deserves." Japp paused, his hand already securing Ashworth's elbow, though years of collaboration had taught him to respect Poirot's instincts, even when they contradicted apparent certainty. "What's troubling you, Poirot? The stolen goods were found in his possession. Seems clear enough to me." "Ah, but that is precisely what troubles the little grey cells," Poirot replied, approaching the recovered timepiece with his characteristic methodical precision. "Consider, mon ami, the psychology of our thief. Someone capable of engineering an extra chime, of severing a delicate chain with surgical precision during a crowded demonstration. Such a person possesses both extraordinary technical skill and nerves of steel. Would such a mastermind then hide the evidence in the most obvious location possible?" He lifted the celestial timepiece with his handkerchief, examining it under his magnifying glass with scientific thoroughness. "Furthermore, observe the condition of this beautiful object. No fingerprints, no scratches, no evidence of hasty handling. It has been wrapped with considerable care in this silk handkerchief, a handkerchief that tells its own story." Eleanor stepped forward, her relief at the timepiece's recovery momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. "I don't recognize that paisley pattern. It's certainly not from our household." Poirot held the silk to the gaslight, studying its weave with professional interest. "Italian silk of excellent quality. The pattern suggests manufacture in Milan, probably within the last 2 years. Most distinctive, and certainly not the sort of accessory one would expect to find in a gentleman's overcoat by accident." Ashworth's face brightened with desperate hope. "You see, I've never owned such a thing. I prefer plain linen. Ask anyone who knows me." "The handkerchief is indeed theatrical," Dr. Whitfield observed, adjusting her spectacles with scientific precision, as if someone wished to ensure the timepiece would be discovered intact and undamaged. But Poirot's attention had shifted to the assembled company, his eyes cataloguing every expression, every involuntary gesture. "We shall test a theory," he announced, moving to the oracle of time. "Mesdames et messieurs, if you would be so kind as to resume your positions exactly as they were during the demonstration." The group arranged itself with reluctant precision. Dr. Whitfield to Eleanor's right, Ashworth near the oracle, but now under the constable's watchful eye. Victor maintaining his languid pose at the doorway, Miss Morse hovering just behind her mistress with hands folded in professional composure. "The lighting, if you please, Mademoiselle Morse," Poirot requested courteously. "Precisely as before." Miss Morse moved to the wall sconce with practiced efficiency, though Poirot noted the slight tremor in her usually steady hands as she adjusted the gas to its previous dim Orient. The room settled into intimate shadows, the chorus of ticking growing more pronounced in the reduced light. "Now," Poirot said, approaching the oracle's mechanism, "we shall observe human nature in its most revealing form." With delicate precision, he manipulated the same lever that had produced the 13th chime, and once again the impossible sound rang out, clear and unmistakable in the hushed room. The reactions were instantaneous and telling. Ashworth flinched protectively toward the recovered timepiece, his dealer's instincts overwhelming his circumstances. Dr. Whitfield's analytical gaze snapped immediately to the opened panel, her scientific mind automatically calculating the mechanical requirements. But it was Miss Morse's response that captured Poirot's complete attention, the involuntary step backward, the hand that darted toward her pocket before she caught herself and forced it down with visible effort. "Most illuminating," Poirot observed mildly, his eyes never leaving Miss Morse's pale face. "The body, it rehearses what the mind has practiced. It is very indiscreet, the body, when confronted with the unexpected repetition of familiar sounds." Eleanor looked puzzled between her companion and the detective. "Monsieur Poirot, surely you don't suspect Catherine? She's been with me for 3 years. Her references were impeccable." "References," Poirot mused, "can be as carefully crafted as any timepiece. Tell me, Mademoiselle Morse, your previous employment. It was with a family in Milan, was it not?" The question struck like a physical blow. Miss Morse's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly, her efficient mask slipping to reveal something far more complex beneath. "How could you possibly know that?" "The handkerchief, mademoiselle. Combined with your intimate knowledge of household routines, your access to every corner of this house, your position during the demonstration, the little grey cells, they begin to perceive a pattern most intriguing." Japp released Ashworth's arm entirely, his professional instincts fully engaged. "Right then, Miss Morse, I think we need to have a proper conversation." But the evening's revelations were far from complete, and Poirot's expression suggested that the true complexity of this temporal puzzle had only begun to unfold. "Un moment, Inspecteur." Poirot's quiet voice carried the unmistakable authority that had halted countless premature arrests throughout his illustrious career. Japp paused, his hand already securing Ashworth's elbow, though years of collaboration had taught him to respect the Belgian detective's instincts, even when they contradicted apparent certainty. "What's troubling you, Poirot?" Japp inquired, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. The stolen goods were found in his possession. Seems straightforward enough. But that is precisely what troubles the little grey cells, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes never leaving Miss Morse's pale countenance. "Consider the psychology of our thief. Someone capable of engineering an extra chime, of severing a delicate chain with surgical precision during a crowded demonstration. Such a person possesses both extraordinary technical skill and nerves of steel." Would such a mastermind then hide the evidence in the most obvious location possible? He approached Miss Morse with courteous precision, noting how her efficient composure had begun to crack under scrutiny. "Mademoiselle, your knowledge of this household's routines is encyclopedic, is it not? You wind the smaller clocks, dust the cases, maintain their precision." Miss Morse's voice, when she found it, carried a tremor that had been absent throughout her years of devoted service. "Mrs. Pemberton entrusted me with the care of the less valuable pieces. Mr. Pemberton himself taught me the basic maintenance." "Indeed." Poirot produced his magnifying glass, examining the small vial of clock oil that had emerged from her pocket. "This is excellent quality oil, of the precise grade used in the finest timepieces. The oracle's mechanism shows recent attention. Fresh oil on a lever that should have remained untouched. Most curious." Dr. Whitfield stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming the evening's tensions. "That oil is specifically formulated for delicate clockwork. It's not something one would use casually." "Precisely, Doctor. And yet, Mademoiselle Morse, your position during the demonstration placed you directly behind Madame Pemberton, within perfect reach of the pendant. Your hands, they were occupied with what exactly?" "My house keys," she replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I hold them during evening gatherings. It's a nervous habit." But Victor Pemberton's languid voice cut through her explanation with surgical precision. "Actually, Miss Morse, I observed you rather carefully during the demonstration. Your hands weren't merely holding keys, you were clutching something that caught the gaslight occasionally. Something metallic, certainly, but your grip was far too intense for mere nervous habit." Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest. "You watched Mademoiselle Morse specifically, Monsieur Victor. How curious. Most guests would have been entranced by the oracle's magnificent display." Victor's smile held no warmth. "I find human behavior far more fascinating than clockwork, however beautiful." Miss Morse seemed particularly agitated as midnight approached. Her breathing quickened, her knuckles went white with tension. "That's quite enough," Eleanor interjected, her voice carrying the authority of a woman accustomed to managing household disputes. "Catherine has served this family faithfully for 3 years. Her references were impeccable." "References," Poirot mused thoughtfully, "can be as carefully crafted as any timepiece. Tell me, Mademoiselle Morse, your previous employment, it was not perhaps in England?" The question struck like a physical blow. Miss Morse's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly, revealing something far more complex beneath her efficient exterior. "My previous position was abroad, in service to a continental family." "Continental," Poirot repeated softly. "And this handkerchief? Italian silk, manufactured in Milan. It would not perhaps remind you of that previous employment?" The silence stretched taut as a clock spring, broken only by the eternal chorus of ticking that pervaded the house. Each character stood frozen in their psychological tableau. Ashworth still protesting his innocence, Dr. Whitfield analyzing the evidence with scientific detachment, Victor watching the proceedings with predatory interest, and Eleanor struggling to reconcile her trust with mounting suspicion. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, assuming the contemplative pose that marked a crucial moment in every investigation. "We have here a most intriguing puzzle, mes amis. Physical evidence that points in one direction, psychological evidence that suggests another, and human motivations that remain tantalizingly obscured. The truth, as always, lies not in what appears obvious, but in what the little grey cells can deduce from the contradictions themselves." Miss Morse's reaction to Poirot's probing question hung in the air, like the final note of a discordant chord. Her usual composure wavered visibly, but before she could respond, a subtle sound drew the detective's attention, the almost inaudible whisper of paper against paper from the direction of Eleanor's writing desk. "Remain precisely where you are, s'il vous plaît," Poirot commanded softly, his voice carrying absolute authority. His eyes swept the assembled company, cataloguing each position with mathematical precision. "Inspector Japp, if you would be so kind as to examine Madame Pemberton's escritoire, but touch nothing until I have observed." Japp moved with professional caution toward the elegant writing desk that stood beneath the window. The gaslight cast long shadows across its leather surface, revealing what appeared to be a slight disarray among the usually pristine papers. "Someone's been at this, Poirot. Recent disturbance to the correspondence." Eleanor stepped forward in alarm. "But that's impossible. Those are private letters, household accounts, nothing of value to anyone else." "Ah, but value, madame, is often in the eye of the beholder," Poirot observed, approaching the desk with his characteristic measured steps. He produced his magnifying glass, studying the scattered papers without disturbing their arrangement. "Most interesting. Someone has been searching for something specific. Observe how certain letters have been partially unfolded, then carefully replaced. This is not random curiosity, but purposeful investigation." Dr. Whitfield adjusted her spectacles nervously. What could anyone possibly want with household correspondence? Perhaps, Poirot mused, the searcher was not interested in the correspondence itself, but in what might be hidden among it. "Tell me, Madame Pemberton, did your late husband ever entrust you with documents relating to his professional relationships? Contracts, perhaps, or correspondence with other horologists?" Eleanor's hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture that had become habitual since the theft. Horatio kept his business affairs quite separate from household matters. Though, she paused, frowning in concentration. "There was a sealed packet he gave me shortly before his death. He instructed me to keep it safe, but not to open it unless certain circumstances arose." The atmosphere in the room grew perceptibly tenser. Victor straightened from his languid pose, while Ashworth's florid complexion deepened with renewed interest. Miss Morse, however, had gone very still, her efficient mask slipping to reveal something approaching panic. "And this packet," Poirot continued with deceptive casualness, "it remains in your possession." "In my private safe," Eleanor confirmed. Horatio was most specific about its importance, though he never explained what circumstances might require its opening. Miss Morse's voice, when she finally spoke, carried a tremor that betrayed her inner turmoil. "Mrs. Pemberton, surely such private matters need not concern—" "Au contraire, mademoiselle," Poirot interrupted gently but firmly. "In a case such as this, all matters concern the investigation. The theft of the celestial timepiece may have been merely the visible portion of a much larger scheme. Someone searches through private papers. Someone possesses intimate knowledge of household routines. Someone understands the precise mechanics of horological instruments." He turned his penetrating gaze upon Miss Morse, whose composure was now hanging by the thinnest of threads. "Your previous employment in Milan, it was not perhaps with a private family, but with a certain Count Valerius, was it not? A gentleman whose reputation in horological circles is, shall we say, controversial." The name struck the gathering like a physical blow. Dr. Whitfield gasped audibly, while Eleanor's face went pale with recognition. "Count Valerius," Eleanor whispered, but he and Horatio were bitter rivals. They had a terrible falling out over some disputed design years ago. Horatio forbade his name to ever be mentioned in this house. Miss Morse swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. I cannot. You don't understand the complexities." "Then perhaps," Poirot said with infinite patience, "you would be so kind as to explain them to us. For I believe the theft of the timepiece was not the crime itself, but merely the distraction from a far more significant objective. Someone seeks something that your late husband possessed, something valuable enough to justify an elaborate deception involving trusted servants and carefully orchestrated misdirection." The silence that followed was broken only by the eternal chorus of ticking that pervaded the house, each timepiece marking the seconds as they slipped inexorably toward revelation. Miss Morse stood frozen between confession and denial, while the assembled company waited with mounting tension for the next piece of this intricate puzzle to fall into place. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his expression both compassionate and implacable. "The truth, Mademoiselle Morse, has a way of emerging despite our best efforts to conceal it. Perhaps it would be wise to speak voluntarily before circumstances compel revelation through less comfortable means." Miss Morse's carefully maintained composure finally shattered like crystal striking stone. Her efficient mask crumbled, revealing the desperate woman beneath 3 years of meticulous deception. She gripped the back of Eleanor's writing chair with white knuckles, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that spoke of long-suppressed terror finally breaking free. "You cannot understand the position I was placed in," she whispered, her voice carrying the hollow echo of someone whose elaborate performance had reached its inevitable conclusion. "Count Valerius is not a man who accepts refusal gracefully, and when he learned of my employment here, he saw an opportunity that I was powerless to refuse." Eleanor stepped backward as if physically struck, her face reflecting a betrayal that cut deeper than any mere theft of property. "Catherine, how could you? I welcomed you into my home, trusted you with my most intimate affairs." "Please," Miss Morse interrupted, tears now flowing freely down her pale cheeks. "You must understand that I never intended personal harm to come to you. My family in Milan, they were threatened. The Count has long arms and longer memories, and he does not forgive those who cross him." Poirot approached with the measured precision of a surgeon examining a delicate mechanism, his eyes cataloguing every nuance of her distress. "The blackmail, mademoiselle. It concerned your previous employment with the Count's household, did it not? Some indiscretion, perhaps, that left you vulnerable to his influence?" Miss Morse nodded miserably. "A foolish romantic entanglement with his nephew. When it ended badly, I was dismissed without references. I thought I had escaped that life when Mrs. Pemberton employed me, but the Count's agents are everywhere in the horological world." "And his specific interest in this household?" Poirot continued, his tone remaining gentle yet inexorable. "It was not merely the celestial timepiece that drew his attention, was it?" "The meridian equations," Miss Morse breathed, the words carrying the weight of long-held secrets. "The mathematical formulae that Horatio used to create the Oracle's synchronization system. The Count claims they were stolen from his private research during their partnership years ago." Dr. Whitfield's analytical mind immediately grasped the implications, her scientific training cutting through the emotional atmosphere. Those equations would be worth a fortune to any serious horologist. With them, one could replicate Horatio's most advanced mechanisms, the very innovations that made him famous throughout Europe. Poirot nodded thoughtfully, then moved to Eleanor's writing desk with his characteristic precision. His magnifying glass emerged as he examined the scattered correspondence, noting details that had escaped everyone else's attention. "Most interesting," he murmured, focusing on a particular envelope whose edge showed the faintest tear, almost imperceptible but telling to trained eyes. "The search of these papers was conducted with considerable haste," he observed, straightening. "This envelope has been torn and carefully resealed, suggesting not leisurely examination but desperate urgency. The 13th chime, Mademoiselle Morse. It was not merely dramatic flourish, was it? It was a precisely timed signal designed to create a specific window of opportunity." Miss Morse's confession poured forth now like water through a broken dam. "I altered the Oracle's mechanism yesterday morning while dusting. The starred cam, if you advance it 2 notches, the sequence produces an extra strike at midnight. During the confusion, while everyone's attention was focused on the demonstration, I had perhaps 30 seconds to search for the sealed packet. But you also stole the timepiece itself," Poirot noted. "Using tools from Dr. Whitfield's case, severing the chain with surgical precision during the chiming sequence, why complicate matters with an actual theft?" "Because I realized, even as I held it in my hands, that I could not complete the betrayal," Miss Morse replied, her voice breaking. The timepiece was meant to be additional distraction, something to ensure the investigation focused elsewhere. But when I saw Mrs. Pemberton's genuine anguish, witnessed her distress at its loss, I knew I could not continue. Eleanor's voice, when she found it, carried bewilderment mixed with hurt. Then why not simply return it to me directly? Because I was terrified of confession, terrified of the Count's reaction, terrified of losing the only real home I had known in years. I thought if the timepiece were discovered in Mr. Ashworth's possession, the matter would be resolved without my involvement being revealed. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his expression combining compassion with professional determination. "And the sealed packet, mademoiselle. Did you succeed in locating it during your brief search?" Miss Morse shook her head emphatically. "I found nothing. The papers were household accounts, personal correspondence, nothing that matched what the Count described. I began to wonder if the packet even existed, or if it was hidden elsewhere entirely." "It exists," Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying new resolve. "And it remains in my possession, safely locked away where neither Count Valerius nor his agents can reach it." Japp stepped forward with professional efficiency. "Right then, Miss Morse. I'll need you to come with me for a proper statement, and we'll be wanting full details about this Count Valerius and his methods." But Poirot held up a restraining hand, his eyes fixed on the faint scent of bergamot that seemed to linger in the air around the writing desk. "Un moment, Inspector. Our investigation has revealed the mechanism of the theft and the motivation behind it, but several questions remain unanswered. The coordination required for this evening's events suggests planning beyond what one desperate woman could accomplish alone." He turned his penetrating gaze upon the assembled company, noting how Victor had maintained his languid pose throughout Miss Morse's confession, showing neither surprise nor particular concern at the revelations. Someone else knew of Mademoiselle Morse's true purpose, someone who could ensure that certain doors remained unlocked. Certain opportunities presented themselves at precisely the right moments. The suggestion hung in the air like the echo of a funeral bell, transforming what had seemed a resolved case of theft and blackmail into something far more complex. The little grey cells were working with increasing intensity, for Poirot sensed that the evening's revelations had only scratched the surface of a conspiracy that reached deeper into the household than anyone yet suspected. As Miss Morse was led away for questioning, her confession having lifted one veil of deception while revealing others beneath, the assembled company found themselves studying each other with new suspicion. The affair at the clockmaker's widow was far from over, and somewhere in the elegant rooms of number 23, Chesham Place, other secrets waited to be unveiled by the methodical precision of Hercule Poirot's legendary investigative powers. As Miss Morse's footsteps faded down the corridor under Inspector Japp's watchful escort, the study settled into a silence that seemed to throb with unresolved tensions. The assembled company found themselves studying each other with new wariness, for if one trusted member of the household could harbor such deception, what other secrets might lurk beneath the veneer of respectability? Poirot remained beside Eleanor's writing desk, his keen senses still cataloguing details that others had overlooked in the drama of confession and arrest. The faint scent of bergamot that had initially caught his attention now seemed more pronounced, lingering like an accusation in the air, thick with clock oil and polished brass. "The confession of Mademoiselle Morse," he began thoughtfully, "while illuminating in many respects, raises as many questions as it answers. Consider, mes amis, the timeline she described. 30 seconds of confusion during the 13th chime, sufficient perhaps to sever a delicate chain with prepared tools, but hardly adequate for a thorough search of private correspondence." Eleanor approached with hesitant steps, her faith in her own household now thoroughly shaken. "But surely, Monsieur Poirot, Catherine explained everything. The Count's blackmail, her desperate search for the sealed packet—" "Ah, but madame," Poirot interrupted gently, producing his magnifying glass to examine the torn envelope more closely. "Observe the evidence with the precision it deserves. This envelope shows signs of multiple examinations. The tears have been carefully smoothed, the wax resealed with considerable skill. Such work requires time, privacy, and most importantly, knowledge of where to search. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the assembled company with surgical precision. Mademoiselle Morse claimed she found nothing in her hasty search, yet someone has been through these papers with methodical thoroughness. Someone who knew precisely what they sought and where it might be hidden. Dr. Whitfield stepped forward, her scientific training engaged by the puzzle. "You're suggesting a collaborator, someone who provided Miss Morse with information about the household's private affairs." "More than mere information, Doctor. Consider the bergamot." Poirot indicated the writing desk with a slight gesture. "This distinctive scent that lingers where it should not be. Expensive cologne, recently applied, suggesting someone stood at this very spot within the last few hours." Victor Pemberton's languid smile faltered almost imperceptibly, though he maintained his casual pose against the doorframe. "Surely you don't suspect the family members themselves, Monsieur Poirot? That would be rather melodramatic even for a detective story." "Melodrama," Poirot repeated thoughtfully, "is often the refuge of those who wish to deflect attention from uncomfortable truths. But let us pursue the matter with scientific method rather than theatrical speculation." He moved with characteristic precision toward the corner of the room where an elegant long-case clock stood, its moon dial glimmering faintly in the gaslight. "Madame Pemberton, this magnificent timepiece, it is more than mere decoration, is it not?" Eleanor's hand fluttered to her throat in the gesture that had become habitual since the theft. Horatio designed it specially. He disliked the ugliness of ordinary safes, insisted that security should be hidden among beautiful things. "Indeed. And the sealed packet you mentioned, it rests within this clock's secret compartment." "Yes," Eleanor replied, moving toward the timepiece with renewed purpose. "The combination is our wedding date and the date of Horatio's first royal medal. He said they were two triumphs we could never forget." As Eleanor's fingers worked the hidden mechanism beneath the moon dial, Poirot noted how Victor's casual demeanor had grown more rigid, more alert. The panel swung inward to reveal a steel door set into the masonry behind, and Eleanor's hands, steady by an act of will, turned at the combination with practiced precision. "If you please, madame," Poirot requested courteously as the bolts withdrew with a discreet sigh, "allow me to examine the contents before they are disturbed." Inside lay a velvet shelf holding a single sealed packet, cream paper addressed in Horatio's bold hand. "To my wife, to be opened only if necessity demands." But even before Eleanor could reach for it, Poirot's magnifying glass was already revealing the truth. "Most interesting," he murmured, his voice carrying a note of grim satisfaction. "Observe, Inspector, along the lower flap, wax that has been softened and carefully reset, and here at the edge, the most delicate scoring where a blade once parted paper. Someone has opened and resealed this packet with admirable skill." Eleanor's face went pale as the implication struck her. "Open it, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever has been done, I must know." With exquisite care, Poirot parted the flap. Inside was a folded sheaf of papers, then another, and then nothing but clean, unmarked stationery, bearing only the ghostly impression of sheets once pressed hard upon another. The meridian equations, Horatio's most valuable intellectual property, had vanished, replaced with worthless blanks. "Gone," Dr. Whitfield breathed, her scientific mind immediately grasping the magnitude of the loss. The equations that made Horatio's synchronization possible, stolen and replaced with forgeries. Julian Ashworth, still smarting from his earlier false accusation, found his voice. Then the timepiece theft was merely a distraction. Someone used Miss Morse's desperation to cover their own far more valuable crime. Poirot nodded gravely. "A most elegant deception. The packet remains, providing psychological security. All is safe, the mind concludes. But in truth, the treasure has long since flown. This substitution required intimate knowledge of the household, access to private spaces, and most crucially, awareness that such a packet existed and where it might be hidden. He turned his penetrating gaze upon Victor, whose cologne now seemed to permeate the very air around the opened safe. The collaboration between Mademoiselle Morse and her mysterious ally was more extensive than her confession suggested. Someone provided her with detailed information about household routines, someone who could ensure certain doors remained unlocked at precisely the right moments. Victor's facade was beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of the bitter resentment that had festered beneath his polished exterior. "You seem remarkably well informed about private family matters, Monsieur Poirot. One might wonder about your sources." "My sources," Poirot replied with infinite patience, "are the little grey cells which observe what others overlook. The bergamot cologne that lingers where it should not be, the fresh oil on mechanisms that should remain untouched, the psychological profile of a young man who feels cheated of his rightful inheritance." As the full scope of the deception began to emerge, not merely theft and blackmail, but a complex conspiracy reaching into the very heart of what had seemed a respectable household, the assembled company found themselves confronting the corrosive effects of greed and resentment that had transformed trusted relationships into instruments of betrayal. The affair of the clockmaker's widow was revealing depths of human complexity that would test even Poirot's legendary powers of deduction, for in the elegant rooms of number 23, Chesham Place, time itself had become both weapon and witness to crimes that struck at the very foundations of trust and family loyalty. Victor Pemberton's carefully maintained facade finally shattered like crystal striking stone, his languid pose abandoned as Poirot's methodical precision stripped away the last vestiges of his elaborate deception. The bergamot cologne that had seemed merely an affectation now hung in the air like an accusation, marking every surface he had touched during his clandestine activities. "The little grey cells, Monsieur Victor," Poirot said with quiet authority. "Observe what others overlook. Your cologne lingers at the writing desk, where the packet was so expertly resealed. It permeates the air around this safe, where the true meridian equations were removed weeks ago and replaced with worthless blanks. Most tellingly, it betrays the psychological profile of a man who felt cheated of his rightful inheritance." Eleanor stepped backward, her face reflecting a betrayal that cut deeper than any mere theft of property. "Victor, how could you? Your father provided for you, loved you." "Loved me?" Victor's bitter laugh held no warmth, only the acid of years of suppressed resentment. A modest trust fund, while his precious equations and recognition went to his second wife, while strangers like Dr. Whitfield inherited his professional legacy. I was the forgotten son, always dismissed, always overlooked. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his expression combining professional interest with human compassion. "Your collaboration with Count Valerius was established long before Mademoiselle Morse's arrival, was it not? Her employment here was no coincidence, but a carefully orchestrated placement designed to provide you with the perfect accomplice." Victor's silence confirmed what logic had already deduced. Dr. Whitfield adjusted her spectacles, her analytical mind following the progression. "You used Catherine's desperation, her fear for her family, to create the perfect distraction while you had already completed the real theft." "She was malleable," Victor admitted with cruel satisfaction. "Terrified for her family, desperate for escape from Valerius's grip, I offered her what seemed like salvation. Retrieve the equations, and her troubles would end. What she didn't realize was that I had already secured them weeks earlier." Poirot nodded gravely. "You accessed the safe during one of Madame Pemberton's afternoon outings, when the house stood empty. You had the time and privacy to meticulously open the sealed packet, photograph or copy the true meridian equations. replace them with blank papers, and reseal everything with such skill that it would pass casual inspection. The timepiece theft tonight was merely theatrical flourish, he continued, his voice gaining momentum. Mademoiselle Morse, in her moral crisis, chose to plant the evidence on Monsieur Ashworth, creating precisely the misdirection you required. While everyone focused on recovering stolen jewelry, the true crime, the theft of intellectual property worth a fortune, remained hidden. Eleanor's voice, when she found it, carried the weight of absolute betrayal. The 13th chime, the confusion, Catherine's desperate search, all of it was performance. Performance and misdirection, Poirot confirmed. Mademoiselle Morse believed she was acting for Count Valerius, searching frantically for equations that were already in your stepson's possession. Her genuine desperation provided perfect authenticity to the deception. Victor straightened with what remained of his dignity, though his face had gone pale with the recognition of inevitable consequences. The equations were mine by right. Horatio's genius should have been my inheritance, not charity dispensed to his second wife and academic protégés. Genius, monsieur, cannot be inherited or stolen, Poirot replied with gentle finality. It must be earned through dedication, integrity, and respect for the work itself, qualities you demonstrated you lacked when you chose betrayal over honest effort. The sound of returning footsteps announced Inspector Japp's arrival, his practical demeanor unchanged, despite the evening's revelations. Miss Morse has provided full details about the Count's network and methods, Poirot. Quite cooperative once she realized the scope of deception she'd been caught in. And Monsieur Victor's role in orchestrating this elaborate conspiracy? Poirot inquired. Japp's expression grew grim. Confirmed everything. Regular meetings, detailed planning, promises of partnership in continental enterprises. Young Mr. Pemberton here has been playing a much longer game than anyone suspected. As the full scope of Victor's betrayal settled over the assembled company, the elegant study seemed to shrink around them, its atmosphere thick with the corrosive effects of greed and family resentment. The chorus of ticking that had once seemed harmonious now sounded like the relentless march of justice, counting down the final moments of an elaborate deception. Poirot moved toward the door with characteristic precision. "Inspector, if you would secure Monsieur Victor for formal questioning. The little grey cells have completed their work, but justice requires its proper procedures." He paused, his gaze encompassing the shattered remains of what had once been a respectable household. "We shall now gather everyone for the final revelation, for in the tradition of these matters, all must hear how time itself became both weapon and witness to crimes that struck at the very heart of family trust." Within minutes, Inspector Japp had reassembled everyone in the study, where the Oracle of Time stood like a silent judge presiding over the evening's revelations. Poirot positioned himself before the magnificent timepiece, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression serene yet inexorable. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice carrying the authority that had resolved countless mysteries, "we arrive at the moment of complete revelation. The little grey cells have sorted truth from deception, and justice shall be served with the precision of clockwork itself." Eleanor sat with remarkable composure despite the devastating betrayals, while Miss Morse occupied a chair near the window, her efficient mask permanently shattered, but her face reflecting something approaching relief. Dr. Whitfield maintained her scientific detachment, and Julian Ashworth, cleared of suspicion, nevertheless appeared chastened by his experience. The 13th chime that began our investigation was indeed impossible, but only if one assumed the oracle's mechanism remained unaltered. Mademoiselle Morse's confession revealed the first layer of deception, her desperate manipulation of the starred cam to create confusion during which she could search for the meridian equations. Poirot approached Victor, who sat under guard with his languid pose replaced by rigid tension. But the little grey cells perceived inconsistencies. 30 seconds of confusion could not accomplish the methodical search evident in Madame Pemberton's correspondence. Someone else had conducted that examination with intimate knowledge and unlimited time. Monsieur Victor, your resentment provided Count Valerius with the perfect collaborator. You arranged Mademoiselle Morse's employment, provided her with household intelligence, and, most crucially, you had already completed the real theft weeks before tonight's theatrical performance. Victor's voice carried no trace of his former charm. The equations were my father's greatest achievement. They should have been my legacy. Legacy is earned through character, not seized through betrayal, Poirot replied firmly. But one question remained. Where would a cautious thief hide stolen intellectual property while awaiting payment from continental buyers? With characteristic precision, Poirot approached the Oracle of Time, producing his magnifying glass to examine a tiny mechanism near the base. The fresh oil I observed earlier. It served not the striking mechanism, but this. He pressed a concealed lever with his handkerchief, and a narrow panel slid open in the oracle's pedestal. Voila, he announced, withdrawing a slim brass cylinder sealed with wax and unmistakably scented with bergamot cologne. The true meridian equations, hidden within the temple of your father's genius, the one place no one would disturb from mere curiosity. Eleanor gasped as Poirot carefully broke the seal, revealing the densely inked sheets covered with Horatio's precise mathematical notations. The originals, he confirmed. Victor scented the seal unconsciously, as nervous hands often do, providing the final clue to their location. Payment was delayed, Victor admitted bitterly. Valerius demanded proof before transferring funds. I couldn't risk carrying them or posting them. So you waited, Poirot observed, using Mademoiselle Morse's genuine desperation to create the perfect distraction. Her moral crisis led her to plant the timepiece on Monsieur Ashworth, providing exactly the misdirection you required while the true crime remained hidden. Inspector Japp stepped forward with professional efficiency. Victor Pemberton, you're under arrest for conspiracy, theft, and attempting to pervert justice. Count Valerius will find European warrants waiting for him. As Victor was led away, his last vestige of dignity crumbling, Eleanor addressed Miss Morse with surprising gentleness. Catherine, you acted from desperation and fear. That doesn't excuse your actions, but it explains them. The court will consider your cooperation, Japp assured her. You helped us recover the real prize. Dr. Whitfield removed her spectacles, her voice steady. Eleanor, I would be honored to help safeguard Horatio's work at the Royal Institution, ensuring it serves science rather than commerce. Poirot restored the oracle's mechanism with loving care, his expression reflecting quiet satisfaction. Order has been restored, Madame Pemberton. Not the order of revenge, but of proportion. Your husband's genius returns to its intended path. Eleanor managed a trembling smile. And what should we do now, Monsieur Poirot? He glanced toward the windows, where dawn was breaking through the dissipating fog. We shall have tea, win the clocks, and begin again. At the proper hour. The oracle gave a soft, correct chime. Not 12, not 13. But simply the right number at the right moment. Poirot inclined his head to it respectfully. Come, Inspector, he said, collecting his coat with characteristic precision. We have restored time's proper measure. Let us not tempt fate further. With that, Hercule Poirot departed number 23, Chesham Place, leaving behind a house where time, truth, and justice had finally resumed their harmonious chorus.